You didn't beat me. You just gave me a reason to rise.
The wrench slipped from my grease-stained fingers when I heard my daughter's voice cut through the garage like a rusty blade. 23 years old and sharp as her mother's tongue, Emma was laying into someone on the phone outside my workshop at midnight in December in Millbrook, where decent people were either drunk or asleep by now. "Dad doesn't get it," she hissed into her phone, voice carrying across the frozen yard. "Mom's done playing housemaid for that grease monkey. 20 years she wasted while he built his pathetic garage business. Of course she needs pleasure from a real man." I froze under the hood of Mrs. Patterson's Buick, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Emma's words kept coming, each one a nail in my coffin. She chose Uncle Jake because he makes her feel desirable, and he's always around. Honestly, I wish he was my dad instead of a loser like Tom. Uncle Jake, my brother, my family. The world tilted sideways. 27 years of marriage, and this is how it ends? With my own daughter wishing I was dead and my brother screwing my wife in whatever cheap motel they could find? I set the wrench down carefully, my hands steadier than they had any right to be. The overhead light buzzed like an angry wasp, casting harsh shadows across my workbench. Tools I'd collected over decades. Business I'd built from nothing. Life I'd constructed brick by brick, while apparently everyone I loved was planning to tear it down. Emma's conversation continued, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was calculating. See, here's what my loving family didn't know about old Tom the Grease Monkey. I might work with my hands, but I think with my head. 20 years running a business in a town where everyone knows everyone teaches you things. How to read people. How to find pressure points. How to make problems disappear without getting your hands dirty. They wanted a villain? Fine, I'd give them one heck of a show. The next morning hit Millbrook like a slap from a frozen fish. December in Michigan meant gray skies, dead grass, and the kind of cold that made your bones ache. I'd been up all night sitting in my workshop with a beer and a yellow legal pad, sketching out my new life plan. Sarah breezed into the kitchen wearing her crisp lawyer outfit, all sharp angles and confidence. She'd made partner at Henderson and Associates last year, the crown jewel of our dying downtown district. 45 years old and still beautiful in that untouchable way that made other men want what they couldn't have, except my brother apparently could have it. "Morning," she said, without looking at me, grabbing her travel mug and checking her phone. "Working late again tonight. Big case." "Which case?" I asked, sipping my coffee and watching her face for tells. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The Morrison divorce, messy custody battle." "Interesting. Morrison divorce wrapped up 3 weeks ago." I knew because Morrison's ex-wife brought her car in for an oil change, crying about her victory. Sarah was lying, and she was bad at it. "Sounds complicated," I said. "Very." She headed for the door, then paused. "Tom, we need to talk soon, about us." "Sure thing, honey, whenever you're ready." She left without a kiss, without a backward glance, without any idea that her husband had just declared war. I finished my coffee and called my shop. "Billy, it's Tom. I'm taking a personal day. Handle the Peterson transmission and tell anyone else they'll have to wait." Billy Thompson had worked for me for 12 years. Good kid. Despite being 35 with 3 kids of his own, he knew when to ask questions and when to mind his own business. "Everything okay, boss?" "Everything's perfect, Billy. Just got some family business to attend to." I hung up and grabbed my jacket. Time to visit my old friend Danny at the Iron Horse gym. The Iron Horse squatted between a defunct Radio Shack and a check-cashing place like a muscled bulldog guarding a junkyard. Danny Kowalski had run the place for 15 years, ever since his boxing career ended with a detached retina and a drinking problem. Now he trained kids and middle-aged guys like me who needed somewhere to hit things legally. "Tom." Danny's voice boomed across the gym as I walked in. The place smelled like sweat, leather, and honest work. "Wasn't expecting you until Thursday." Plans changed. I wrapped my hands and started working the heavy bag. Jab, cross, hook. The rhythm helped me think. "Danny, what would you do if you found out your wife was cheating?" Danny stopped adjusting the speed bag and looked at me seriously. "With who?" "My brother." "Jesus Christ!" Danny whistled low. "Jake, that pretty boy piece of crap?" "The very same." Danny walked over and held the bag steady while I threw combinations. "How long?" "Not sure. Months, maybe longer." "You want my advice? Get mean or get gone. But don't get stupid." I stopped punching and looked at him. Danny had survived 3 tours in the Middle East and a wife who cleaned out their bank account while he was deployed. If anyone understood strategic thinking, it was him. "What's mean look like?" I asked. Danny grinned, and it wasn't pretty. "You really want to know?" For the next hour, Danny laid out possibilities. Nothing illegal, nothing that would land me in jail. Just good old-fashioned psychological warfare applied by someone who understood how small towns worked. "The thing about cheaters," Danny said, "is they think they're smarter than everyone else. Use that against them." I left the gym with a plan forming and drove to Jake's apartment complex. The Riverside Towers weren't towers and weren't near a river, just 3 stories of peeling paint and broken dreams. Jake's red Camaro was parked in his usual spot, which meant he wasn't at work. Interesting. I parked across the street and called Jake's office. "RMC Construction, this is Jennifer." "Hey, Jennifer, it's Tom Mitchell. Is Jake available?" "Oh, hi, Tom. Jake called in sick today. Some kind of flu bug." "That's too bad. Tell him his brother called, will you?" I hung up and settled in to wait. 30 minutes later, Sarah's Mercedes pulled into the lot. My wife climbed out wearing jeans and a sweater I'd bought her for her birthday. She looked around nervously, then headed for Jake's building. "The flu, huh?" I took pictures. Not because I needed evidence for divorce court, but because I needed ammunition for what came next. Modern phones made surveillance easy, and Sarah wasn't exactly being careful. They emerged 2 hours later. Sarah looked satisfied in that way that made my stomach turn. Jake looked smug, like he'd just won something valuable. They kissed goodbye right there in the parking lot, broad daylight, not caring who might see. Amateur hour. I followed Jake to the Riverside Diner, where he met 3 of his construction buddies for lunch. They were loud, crude, and drunk on their own masculinity. Perfect. I walked in 10 minutes later and sat 2 tables away, close enough to eavesdrop. Jake was telling stories, and I was the punchline. "Poor Tom," Jake laughed, taking a swig of beer. "Guy's so clueless he probably thinks Sarah's working late for real. Meanwhile, she's getting the kind of attention he could never give her." His buddies laughed. One of them, a thick-necked idiot named Rick, slapped the table. "How long you think before he figures it out?" "Tom? Heck, he's too busy with his little garage to notice anything. Sarah says he hasn't touched her in months. Can't blame her for shopping elsewhere." I stood up, walked to their table, and sat down without being invited. "Hey, Jake." The laughter died. Jake's face went white, then red. "Tom, what are you doing here?" "Grabbing lunch. Couldn't help overhearing your conversation about my wife." I smiled pleasantly. Fascinating stuff. The 3 buddies suddenly found their food very interesting. Jake tried to bluster. "Tom? I was just what? Just telling your friends how you're screwing my wife while I'm at work?" I kept my voice conversational like we were discussing the weather. "No need to explain, Jake. I get it." Jake started to stand, but I held up a hand. "Sit down, little brother. We're not done talking." The entire diner had gone quiet. Millbrook loved drama, and this was premium entertainment. "You want to know what's really funny?" I continued. "Sarah thinks she's being clever. You think you're being clever, but you're both making the same mistake." "What mistake?" Jake's voice cracked slightly. I leaned forward and smiled. "You're assuming I'm the same Tom you grew up with. The one who let you win at everything because you were younger. The one who bailed you out of trouble because family comes first." I stood up, threw a 20 on the table, and looked down at my brother. "That Tom's dead, Jake. You ended him. What's left is something you really don't want to meet in a dark alley." I walked out to absolute silence. 3 hours later, my phone rang. Sarah, furious. "What the heck did you do to Jake?" "Had lunch with him. Why?" "He's talking crazy. Says you threatened him." "Did I? Must have been the flu talking. Heard he was sick today." Long pause. Sarah was smart enough to realize I knew, not smart enough to realize how much trouble she was in. "Tom, we need to talk." "Absolutely." "How about tonight? I'll cook dinner. Just the 2 of us." Another pause. "Okay, 8 o'clock." I spent the afternoon preparing, not dinner. War. First stop, Henderson and Associates. I knew the building well. Sarah had dragged me to enough office parties over the years. I also knew Henderson himself, crusty old bastard who valued his firm's reputation above everything else. I walked into the reception area wearing my best shirt and most innocent smile. "Hi, is Mr. Henderson available?" "It's Tom Mitchell, Sarah's husband." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Henderson's massive desk, surrounded by law books and the smell of expensive leather. "Tom, good to see you. How's the business?" "Can't complain," Actually, I wanted to ask you something confidential about Sarah. Henderson's eyebrows rose. Oh? She's been working a lot of late nights lately. I'm worried about her. Think the stress might be getting to her? I paused, letting concern color my voice. Yesterday she told me she was working on the Morrison case, but I ran into Morrison's ex-wife and she said that case wrapped up weeks ago. Henderson's face went very still. Is that so? I'm probably misunderstanding something. Sarah's the lawyer, not me. But I'm worried she might be having some kind of breakdown, forgetting things, making up work that doesn't exist. I let that hang in the air while Henderson's wheels turned. Law firms lived and died on billable hours and client trust. If a partner was lying about cases, claiming time that didn't exist, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, Tom. I'll look into it discreetly. Thanks, Mr. Henderson. I just want what's best for Sarah. I left feeling better than I had in months. Stop 2, Emma's college. My daughter was a senior at Millbrook Community College, studying business administration with my money and planning to graduate into a world where daddy was the joke. I found her in the student center, holding court with 3 friends. She looked like her mother. Same blonde hair, same blue eyes, same entitled expression that said the world owed her everything. Emma, we need to talk. She looked annoyed. Dad, I'm busy. Now. Something in my voice made her friends scatter. We walked outside where the December wind cut through my jacket like a knife. What's this about? She asked. Your trust fund? Emma's face changed. The trust fund was her college money, her car money, her apartment money. 23 years of me saving every spare dollar so my daughter could have opportunities I never had. What about it? I'm closing it. The color drained from her face. You can't do that. Actually, I can. It's my money, my account, my rules. I pulled out a piece of paper. This is a withdrawal form. I'll be cashing out everything tomorrow morning. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Because my daughter told someone she wished I wasn't her father. Because she thinks I'm a loser who doesn't deserve respect. Because she's been helping her mother lie to me for God knows how long. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but I was past caring. Dad, I didn't mean... Yeah, you did, and you know what? That's fine. You're an adult. You can make adult choices and face adult consequences. You're destroying my life. No, sweetheart, I'm teaching you that actions have consequences. Your mother and uncle are about to learn the same lesson. I walked away, leaving my daughter crying in the parking lot. It should have broken my heart. Instead, it felt like lancing an infected wound. That evening, Sarah came home at exactly 8 o'clock. She'd changed into jeans and a sweater, trying to look casual and failing. Her hands shook slightly as she poured wine. So, she said, settling across from me at our kitchen table, we should talk. Yes, we should. Sarah took a deep breath. Tom, I think we've grown apart. Maybe we should consider separation. I almost laughed. 27 years of marriage, and she was going to try the gentle letdown approach, like I was some fragile flower who might wilt at harsh words. Separation, I repeated. Interesting timing. What do you mean? Well, you've been working so many late nights lately, all those complicated cases. Must be exhausting. Her face tightened. My work is demanding. The Morrison case, for example. You mentioned that one specifically. Sarah's wineglass paused halfway to her lips. Yes. Funny thing about that case, Sarah, it ended 3 weeks ago. The glass trembled in her hand. There are multiple Morrison cases. Are there? Because I had lunch with Henderson today. The glass hit the table hard enough to slosh wine across the wood. Sarah's face went pale, then flushed angry red. You went to my office? You talked to my boss? I was concerned about my wife. She seemed confused, talking about cases that didn't exist. I thought maybe the stress was getting to her. Sarah stood up so fast her chair scraped across the floor. You son of a witch. There's the Sarah I married. Took you long enough to drop the act. What do you want, Tom? I leaned back in my chair, suddenly feeling more relaxed than I had in months. I want honesty. I want you to tell me about Jake. There's nothing to tell. Really? Because Jake seems to think otherwise. Had an interesting conversation with him today at the Riverside Diner. He was sharing details about your relationship with his construction buddies. Very specific details. Sarah's knees buckled. She sat down hard, her lawyer composure cracking like ice on a spring pond. How long? I asked. Tom, how long, Sarah? 6 months. The words came out in a whisper. 6 months. I nodded. Our anniversary was 8 months ago. We went to that bed and breakfast in Traverse City. You seemed happy. I was trying. You were trying to what? Figure out how to dump me without losing half your assets? Sarah's silence was answer enough. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at our backyard. Snow covered the swing set I'd built for Emma 15 years ago. The garden Sarah used to tend before her career became more important than our marriage. The life we'd built together, reduced to a crime scene. Here's what's going to happen, I said, without turning around. You're going to move out, tonight. You can stay with Jake, or your mother, or a hotel. I don't care. Tom, please. I'm not finished. I turned back to face her. Emma's trust fund is gone. College money, car payments, apartment rent, all of it. She can figure out how to pay for her own life. You can't punish her for choosing sides, for calling me a loser, for wishing her uncle was her father. I smiled and Sarah flinched. Watch me. And Jake? Jake's special. Jake gets a personalized experience. Sarah's phone buzzed. She looked at it and went even paler. Problem? I asked. Henderson wants to see me first thing tomorrow morning. Huh. Wonder what that's about. I walked past her toward the stairs, then paused. Oh, and Sarah? You might want to call Jake. Tell him his flu recovery is about to get a lot more complicated. I went upstairs and packed a bag. Not because I was leaving. This was my house. Bought with my money, maintained with my sweat, but because I wanted Sarah to think I was running scared, let her think she'd won, let her get comfortable. The trap was just beginning to close. I spent the night at Danny's apartment above the gym, telling him everything while we worked through a bottle of whiskey and planned my next moves. The brother's the key, Danny said, shadowboxing in his living room. Take him down and the rest follows. Jake's always been the favorite. Mom's golden boy, Dad's pride and joy. Even after they died, he kept that pretty boy charm working. What's his weakness? I thought about it. His ego. Jake thinks he's untouchable because he's good-looking and charismatic. He's never faced real consequences for anything. Time to change that. The next morning, I drove to Jake's job site. RMC Construction was building a strip mall on the outskirts of town, another monument to Millbrook's slow decay. Jake was easy to spot. Still handsome at 42, still carrying himself like the high school quarterback he used to be. I parked and walked over to where he was talking with his crew chief. Morning, Jake. He turned, and I saw fear flicker across his face before he covered it with false bravado. Tom, what brings you out here? Wanted to congratulate you on your new relationship? The crew chief, a massive guy named Donnie, looked between us with interest. Construction sites were gossip mills worse than beauty salons. I don't know what you're talking about, Jake said. Sure you do. You and Sarah, my wife, your sister-in-law. I kept my voice loud enough for the crew to hear. How long you two been playing house? Jake's face went red. Tom, you're making a scene. Am I? Because from where I stand, you're the one making scenes in motels with my wife, while telling your buddies all about it. Donnie and two other workers had stopped what they were doing to watch. In 15 minutes, this conversation would be all over town. You're crazy, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. Crazy like a fox. I stepped closer. Here's what's going to happen, little brother. You're going to stay away from my wife. You're going to stay away from my house. And you're going to stop telling your construction buddies about your love life. Or what? I smiled. Or I'll show everyone in this town exactly who you really are. I walked away, leaving Jake standing there with his mouth open and his crew staring at him like he'd grown a second head. Phase 1, complete. Sarah's car wasn't in our driveway when I got home, which meant she was either at work dealing with Henderson or at Jake's place having a crisis meeting. I hoped it was both. I spent the afternoon making phone calls. First to our bank, closing our joint accounts and transferring everything to accounts with only my name. Legal, since I'd been the sole contributor for 15 years. Then to our credit card companies, reporting the cards lost and requesting new ones sent to my address only. Then I called Emma. Dad, I've been trying to reach you all day. I've been busy. What's up? My debit card isn't working. And when I called the bank, they said my account was closed. That's right. What do you mean, that's right? You can't just... I can, and I did. Like I told you yesterday, actions have consequences. Dad, please, I need that money for rent, for food. Then get a job. You're 23, Emma. Time to learn how the real world works. I'm sorry for what I said. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. I hung up on my daughter's sobbing and felt absolutely nothing. The house was quiet when Sarah finally came home at 9:30. She looked like she'd been crying, which meant Henderson had delivered the bad news. She'd either been suspended or fired. Either way, her career was circling the drain. Tom, we need to talk. I'm listening. She sat down across from me, mascara smudged, hands shaking. Henderson suspended me pending an investigation. Someone told him I was billing hours for non-existent cases. Huh, that's terrible. You did this. I had lunch with Henderson yesterday and expressed concern about my wife's mental health, that's all. You destroyed my career. I looked at her, really looked. This woman I'd loved for 27 years, who'd borne my child, who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my fears. This stranger who'd been living a double life while I worked 60-hour weeks to give her everything she wanted. No, Sarah, you destroyed your career. I just helped it along. She was quiet for a long moment. What do you want? I want you gone. Tonight. Pack whatever you need and get out. This is my house, too. Actually, it's not. Check the deed. I bought this place 3 years before we got married. You're not on the title. Another lie she'd believed. Sarah had never bothered to check legal documents. That was lawyer work, and she was the lawyer. Except I'd had my own lawyer review everything years ago, back when I still trusted her but wanted to protect my business assets. You can't kick me out. I'm not kicking you out. I'm asking you to leave. If you refuse, I'll call the police and report that my estranged wife is trespassing on my property and threatening me. You wouldn't. I pulled out my phone. Want to bet? Sarah stared at me like I'd grown horns. Who are you? I'm the man you married, Sarah. The same one who built a business from nothing, who worked 2 jobs to put you through law school, who sacrificed everything so you could have your career. I set the phone down. The difference is, now I'm working for myself instead of for you. She packed a bag and left without another word. I poured myself a drink and sat in my empty house, listening to the furnace kick on and the old wood settle. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But I was just getting started. The next morning brought the first of many phone calls. Emma, crying about her cut-off money. Jake, threatening to kick my Sarah's mother, demanding to know what I'd done to her precious daughter. I let them all go to voicemail and headed to the gym. How'd it go? Danny asked as I wrapped my hands. Like Christmas morning, everyone's opening their presents and discovering coal. What's next? Time to get creative. Danny held the heavy bag while I explained my research. Small towns ran on gossip, reputation, and social connections. Jake's construction business depended on city contracts and word-of-mouth referrals. Sarah's law career required client trust and professional respect. Emma's social life revolved around being the popular girl with the successful parents. All 3 had pressure points. All 3 were about to discover what happened when you pushed a patient man too far. You sure about this? Danny asked. Once you start, there's no going back. They crossed that line first. That afternoon, I paid a visit to City Hall. Millbrook was small enough that everyone knew everyone, which made navigation easy. I wanted to talk to Frank Morrison, head of the City Planning Commission, and the guy who approved construction contracts. Frank was an old friend. We'd gone to high school together, played on the same football team, dated the same girls. He'd gotten into politics, I'd gotten into business, but we'd stayed close over the years. Tom, heck of a thing what I'm hearing around town. People talk. They sure do. Heard your brother's been stepping out of line. I sat down in Frank's cluttered office, surrounded by blueprints and city ordinances. Frank, can I ask you something, hypothetically? Go ahead. If someone was bidding on city contracts and that someone was known to be unreliable, showing up to meetings drunk, lying to clients, that kind of thing, would the city want to know? Frank leaned back in his chair. The city would want to know if a contractor was unprofessional, sure. Taxpayer money's involved. What if someone had documentation of that behavior? Documentation would be helpful. I pulled out my phone and showed Frank the pictures I'd taken yesterday. Jake leaving a bar at 2 p.m, stumbling to his truck. Jake on his job site, screaming at workers. Jake with Sarah, kissing in the parking lot during work hours. Jesus, Tom, this is your brother we're talking about. My brother chose to make this personal. Frank studied the photos. You know this will probably end his business. That's his choice to make. Frank was quiet for a moment. Tom, I've known you for 30 years. You sure you want to go down this road? Someone burned my bridges, Frank. I'm just making sure they can't cross back over. That evening, I drove to the Rusty Anchor, Millbrook's premier dive bar. The kind of place where construction workers, mechanics, and other members of the working class gathered to complain about their lives and drink away their problems. Jake was already there, 3 beers deep and surrounded by his usual crowd. I walked in like I owned the place and ordered a whiskey. "Well, well," Rick called out. "Look who's here, Tommy the tough guy." I ignored him and focused on Jake. "How's business, brother?" "Screw you, Tom. That's not very nice. We're family after all." Jake stood up, swaying slightly. "You want to do this here?" "Do what? Have a conversation with my brother?" "You know what you did. Henderson's asking questions about Sarah. The city's reviewing my contracts. You think you're real smart." I sipped my whiskey. "I think I'm learning to play the game the way you taught me." Jake took a swing. I saw it coming from a mile away. He was drunk, angry, and stupid. I stepped aside and let him stumble past me into the bar. The place erupted. Rick and his buddies jumped up, but Danny appeared beside me like magic. Funny how fast a former Marine could move when motivated. "Problem here, Tom?" Danny's voice was calm, but his fists were ready. "No problem at all. Jake's just had too much to drink." Jake climbed to his feet, nose bruised and humiliated in front of his friends. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." I finished my drink and set the glass down. "You just don't know it yet." Danny and I walked out of the Rusty Anchor while Jake's buddies helped him back to his stool. Another story for the gossip mill. Another nail in Jake's reputation. The next morning brought results. Sarah called at 6 a.m. hysterical. "Henderson fired me. He says I was billing fraudulent hours and conducting personal business during work time." "That's terrible. How did he find out?" "Someone sent him pictures. Pictures of me with Jake during work hours. Who would do such a thing? You know perfectly well who—" I was making coffee, utterly calm. "Sarah, I think you're being paranoid. Maybe Henderson just did his own investigation. They're reviewing all my cases. They might report me to the state bar. Even better. I hadn't thought that far ahead, but Henderson was thorough. If the state bar got involved, Sarah's law license could be suspended or revoked entirely." "I'm sure it'll work out," I said. "You're a good lawyer." "Tom, please, we can work this out. The thing with Jake, it's over. It was a mistake." "Which part was the mistake? Sleeping with my brother or getting caught?" Long pause. "Both." "Well, at least you're honest now." "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to live with the consequences of your choices, just like I'm living with mine." I hung up and called the garage. "Billy, I'll be in this afternoon. Got some personal business to finish first." "Boss, there's been people calling. Your brother, your wife, some woman claiming to be your daughter. They all sound pretty upset. Let them be upset. It's good for the soul." The morning news delivered another Christmas present. Frank Morrison had called an emergency meeting of the City Planning Commission to review RMC Construction's current contracts. Questions about professionalism and reliability were cited as the reason. I drove past Jake's job site and saw him arguing with Donnie and 3 other workers. Even from a distance, I could tell it wasn't going well. Jake's gestures were wild, desperate. His crew looked skeptical. By lunchtime, half of Jake's workers had walked off the job. I was at the hardware store buying supplies when I ran into Sarah's best friend, Monica Walsh. Monica was a real estate agent with a big mouth and bigger opinions about everyone else's business. She'd been Sarah's enabler for years, always ready with advice about how Sarah deserved better than her blue-collar husband. "Tom, I heard about you and Sarah. I'm so sorry." Monica's sympathy was about as genuine as a $3 bill, but I played along. "Thanks, Monica. It's been tough. If there's anything I can do—" "Actually, there is something. Sarah mentioned you've been helping her with some personal matters lately." Monica's smile faltered. "Personal matters?" "You know, advice about relationships. Places to go when you need privacy, that kind of thing." "I don't know what you mean." But she did. I could see it in her eyes. Monica wasn't just Sarah's enabler. She was her accomplice. The one who'd helped arrange secret meetings, provided alibis, maybe even suggested Jake as the perfect affair partner. "Of course you don't," I said pleasantly. "My mistake." I bought my supplies and left Monica standing there, probably already speed dialing Sarah to report our conversation. That afternoon, I implemented phase 2 of my plan. I drove to the Millbrook Herald, our local newspaper. The Herald was a weekly rag that survived on wedding announcements, obituaries, and local gossip disguised as news. The editor was a bitter woman named Patricia Cook, who'd been documenting our town's decline for 20 years. "Tom Mitchell, Haven't seen you in here since you took out that ad for your business expansion. Hi, Patricia. I wanted to talk to you about a story idea. Patricia's eyes lit up. Scandal was her favorite flavor of news. What kind of story? Local business corruption. City contracts going to unqualified bidders. That sort of thing. I laid out Jake's situation without mentioning our family connection. Patricia took notes like a woman possessed, already seeing headlines in her head. You have documentation? I handed her copies of Jake's work history, recent job site problems, and the city's review of his contracts. All public records, all legally obtained, all deeply incriminating. This is good stuff, Tom. Real good stuff. I thought you might be interested. Patricia's article would run in next week's Herald, but she'd start making calls today. By evening, everyone would know that Jake Mitchell's construction business was under investigation for shoddy work and questionable billing practices. I left the Herald feeling like I'd just lit a very long fuse. My phone rang as I walked to my truck. Sarah, of course. Tom, we need to meet tonight. I'm busy. Monica told me about your conversation. What are you trying to do? I'm not trying to do anything, Sarah. I'm doing it. Meet me at the cabin. 8 o'clock. The cabin. Our old retreat spot on Gull Lake, 20 minutes outside town. We'd bought it together during happier times when we still thought we were building something that would last. Fine. 8 o'clock. And Tom? Come alone. I almost laughed, like I was the one who couldn't be trusted. The cabin sat on 2 acres of woods overlooking a lake that had been beautiful once, before the factories upstream started dumping chemicals and the housing developments scared away the wildlife. Now it was just gray water surrounded by dying trees, perfect for the conversation we were about to have. Sarah's Mercedes was already there when I arrived. So was Jake's Camaro, and another car I didn't recognize, a blue Honda with Michigan plates. I parked and walked to the front door, which opened before I could knock. Tom. Sarah stood there looking like she'd aged 5 years in 2 days. Come in. Jake was sitting on our old couch, holding a beer and trying to look casual. He failed. Next to him sat a woman I'd never seen before, mid-30s, blonde, wearing expensive clothes that didn't match the cabin's rustic atmosphere. Tom, this is Lisa Walsh, Sarah said. Monica's sister. I looked at Lisa, then at Sarah, then at Jake. The pieces clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. Let me guess, I said. Lisa's the real mastermind here. Lisa smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut glass. Hello, Tom. We need to talk. About what? About how this whole thing started. About why Sarah really began her affair with Jake. About the business you destroyed 5 years ago. I sat down in the chair across from them, suddenly feeling like I was walking into a trap. What business? Walsh Properties, Lisa said. My real estate development company. The one you refused to do business with. The one that went bankrupt when you convinced half the town I was running a scam. The memory came flooding back. Lisa Walsh had tried to hire my garage to service her construction vehicles 5 years ago. But her company was cutting corners, using substandard materials, bribing city inspectors. I'd refused the contract and advised other business owners to stay away. Walsh Properties had collapsed 6 months later, taking several local investors with it. You weren't running a scam, I said slowly. You were running several scams. I was trying to revitalize this dying town. By building houses that would fall down in 10 years and stealing people's retirement money. Lisa's facade cracked, showing the rage underneath. You destroyed everything I worked for. So I decided to return the favor by convincing my wife to cheat on me. By showing your wife what kind of man she was really married to. Sarah was unhappy long before I came along. I just helped her see that she deserved better. I looked at Sarah. How long have you known Lisa? 2 years, Sarah admitted. She approached me at a bar association meeting and suggested what? That you'd be happier with my brother? She suggested I deserved to feel valued, appreciated. Jake made me feel those things. Jake made you feel those things because Lisa told him to. Jake stood up, his face red with embarrassment and alcohol. That's not true. I love Sarah. Sit down, Jake, Lisa snapped. You've done enough damage. Jake sat, just like that, like a trained dog. I started laughing. Not because anything was funny, but because the sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. So let me get this straight, I said. You destroyed my marriage as revenge for me exposing your business fraud. You manipulated my wife into thinking she was unhappy. You convinced my brother to betray me, all because I wouldn't help you steal from our neighbors. All because you thought you were better than everyone else, Lisa snarled. Mr. Moral Authority, deciding who deserves success and who doesn't. I prevented you from cheating people. You prevented me from giving this town a future. I looked around the room at my wife, my brother, and the woman who'd orchestrated the destruction of my family. 3 people who'd conspired to tear apart everything I built. And for what? Revenge for a business deal that went south because of their own corruption. Well, I said, standing up, this has been enlightening. Where are you going? Sarah asked. Home, to plan your funerals. Tom? Jake started. Not literal funerals, you idiot. Social funerals, professional funerals. The kind where you're still breathing but everyone wishes you weren't. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Lisa, thanks for the confession. Jake, thanks for being exactly as weak as I always thought you were. Sarah? I paused, looking at my wife of 27 years. Thanks for showing me who you really are. I left them sitting there and drove home, my mind racing with possibilities. They declared war on my life. Time to show them what total war looked like. The next morning, I called in every favor I'd accumulated over 20 years of business ownership. Frank Morrison at City Planning, Patricia Cook at the Herald, Henderson at the law firm, Danny at the gym, Billy at my garage, even Mrs. Patterson, who'd been bringing her Buick to me for 15 years and knew half the town's secrets. By noon, I had a network of allies that would make a politician jealous. By evening, I had a plan that would make a general proud. Phase 3 began at the Millbrook Community Center, where the monthly town hall meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. These meetings were usually boring affairs attended by a dozen city employees and whoever was angry about potholes or snow removal that week. Tonight would be different. I arrived early and set up my laptop in the back row. Danny sat beside me along with 3 of his gym regulars who owed me favors. Frank Morrison was at the front with the other city officials. Patricia Cook sat in the 3rd row with her notebook and camera. At 7:15, Sarah, Jake, and Lisa walked in together. They looked nervous, scanning the unusually large crowd with growing alarm. Good. Mayor Hendricks called the meeting to order and began with routine business: budget reports, maintenance schedules, permit approvals. I waited through 20 minutes of municipal tedium before standing up. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to address the council about municipal corruption. Hendricks looked surprised. Municipal corruption? Specifically, the practice of awarding city contracts to unqualified bidders who inflate costs and deliver substandard work. Jake went pale. Sarah grabbed his arm. I have documentation, I continued, showing systematic overcharging on recent construction projects, along with evidence of safety violations and code infractions that were overlooked due to personal relationships between contractors and city officials. This was mostly true. Jake's recent work had been sloppy, and his billing was questionable. The personal relationships part was artistic license, but effective. Mr. Mitchell, Hendricks said carefully, these are serious accusations. They are indeed. I opened my laptop and activated the projector. Let me show you what I've discovered. For the next 30 minutes, I laid out Jake's professional failures in excruciating detail. Photographs of shoddy construction work, documentation of cost overruns, testimony from workers who'd quit rather than put their names on substandard projects. The room buzzed with whispers and murmurs. Jake tried to stand up twice, but Lisa pulled him back down. Sarah stared at her hands, her face burning with embarrassment. Furthermore, I continued, I have reason to believe this contractor has been billing the city for work performed during personal time, including romantic liaisons conducted during business hours. I clicked to the next slide. Jake and Sarah kissing in the motel parking lot, time-stamped during work hours on a city project. The room erupted. That's my wife, someone shouted from the back. And that's my tax money, called out another voice. Hendricks banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order! But order was the last thing anyone wanted. The crowd was hungry for a fight, and I'd just served up a 3-course meal. Jake finally managed to stand up. This is all lies. Tom's trying to destroy me because of personal issues? Personal issues? I asked innocently. You mean like sleeping with my wife? The room went dead silent. Because that's not a personal issue, Jake. That's a character issue. And character matters when you're spending taxpayer money. Jake opened his mouth to respond, but Lisa grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the exit. Sarah followed, her head down, shoulders shaking. The crowd parted to let them pass, then closed ranks behind them like antibodies rejecting an infection. Mayor Hendricks banged his gavel one more time. This meeting is adjourned pending further investigation. I packed up my laptop and headed for the door where Patricia Cook was waiting with her camera. Heck of a show, Tom. Mind if I ask a few questions? Fire away. What's your next move? I smiled for her camera. Justice. The Herald hit the streets 2 days later with a front-page headline that made people choke on their morning coffee. Local contractor accused of billing fraud, adultery. Patricia had done her homework. The article detailed Jake's professional shortcomings, his affair with Sarah, and the questions surrounding his city contracts. She'd even tracked down 3 of his former employees who were happy to discuss his drinking, his temper, and his habit of cutting corners. Jake's construction business was finished. By noon, the city had suspended all his contracts pending review. By evening, his remaining employees had found other jobs. Sarah's situation was worse. Henderson had reported her to the state bar for professional misconduct. Her law license was suspended pending investigation. Her career was over. Emma called that night, sobbing. Dad, everyone's talking about Mom, about our family. I can't go to class without people staring at me. That's tough. How can you be so cold? This is destroying our lives. No, Emma, your mother destroyed our lives. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. She made a mistake. She made a choice, multiple choices, over 6 months, while lying to my face every single day. Emma was quiet for a moment. What about me? I'm your daughter. You're an adult who chose to betray her father. Now you get to live with those consequences. I didn't betray you. You told someone you wished I wasn't your father. You helped your mother lie to me. You called me a loser. My voice stayed calm, matter of fact. Those are betrayals, Emma. The fact that you can't see that just proves you're not ready to be treated like an adult. Dad, please. I hung up. 3 days after the Herald article, Jake showed up at my garage. He looked like he'd been living in his car, unshaven, unwashed, wearing the same clothes he'd had on at the town meeting. Tom, we need to talk. I was under the hood of a Ford pickup trying to diagnose a transmission problem. Talk. This has gone far enough. You've destroyed my business, ruined Sarah's career, humiliated us in front of the whole town. What more do you want? I straightened up and wiped my hands on a rag. I want you to understand something, Jake. Everything that's happened to you is a direct result of your own choices. You orchestrated this whole thing? I exposed your choices. There's a difference. Jake's hands clenched into fists. You self-righteous bastard, like you've never made mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes, but I never betrayed my family. I never slept with my brother's wife. I never lied to people who trusted me. Sarah doesn't love you anymore. She hasn't for years. Maybe not, but that gave her the right to ask for a divorce, not to cheat on me with my brother while spending my money and living in my house. Jake took a step closer. You think you're so much better than everyone else? No, Jake. I think I'm better than you, and I've spent the last month proving it. He swung at me then, a wild haymaker telegraphed from Cleveland. I ducked easily and caught him with an uppercut to the solar plexus that dropped him to his knees. Stay down, I advised. You're embarrassing yourself. Jake gasped for air, clutching his stomach. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Your business is gone. Your reputation is gone. Your future in this town is gone. I knelt down beside him. But here's the really beautiful part, Jake. I didn't do any of that to you. You did it to yourself. I just made sure everyone was watching. I stood up and went back to work on the Ford. Jake eventually picked himself up and staggered out of my garage. I never saw him again. Sarah lasted 2 more weeks before she broke. She showed up at my house on a Thursday night, drunk and desperate. I found her sitting on my front porch, crying into a bottle of wine. Tom, please, we need to talk. We've talked. Multiple times. I've lost everything. My job, my friends, my reputation. Even Emma won't speak to me. Emma's not speaking to me either. Guess we're even? Sarah looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. How did you become so cruel? I sat down beside her on the porch steps. You really want to know? She nodded. I became cruel the night I heard my daughter tell someone she wished I wasn't her father. I became cruel when I realized my wife was lying to my face every single day. I became cruel when I found out my own brother was bragging to his friends about screwing my wife. I took the wine bottle from her hands and set it aside. You want to know the really cruel part, Sarah? I still love you. After everything you've done, everything you've put me through, I still love the woman I married 27 years ago. Then why? Because that woman doesn't exist anymore. Maybe she never existed. Maybe I just wanted her to so badly that I invented her. Sarah leaned against me, and for a moment it felt like old times. Before the lies, before the betrayal, before everything turned to ash. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know you are, but sorry doesn't fix anything. Sorry doesn't give me back the last 6 months of my life. Sorry doesn't erase the humiliation, or the pain, or the fact that my own family conspired against me. What do you want me to do? I want you to disappear. Leave town, start over somewhere else, build a new life, and try to be better than you were here. What about us? There is no us. There hasn't been for a long time." Sarah started crying again, but I was past the point where her tears could move me. I'd cried my own tears in private, in my workshop, late at night when no one could see the strong man break down. "Tom? Yeah? For what it's worth, you were right about Lisa. She manipulated all of us. She played us against each other like pieces on a chessboard. I know. Are you going to do anything about it?" I smiled, and Sarah shivered at whatever she saw in my expression. "Lisa's already done." The next morning, I drove to the Henderson and Associates law office for a meeting I'd scheduled the week before. Henderson was waiting with 2 of his partners and a stack of legal documents. "Tom, good to see you. I trust you've reviewed the materials we discussed?" "Thoroughly." The materials were Lisa Walsh's business records from 5 years ago. Records that showed she'd been skimming money from client accounts, bribing city officials, and falsifying construction reports. Records that Henderson's firm had obtained through perfectly legal discovery processes when they'd represented several of Lisa's victims in civil suits. Records that proved Lisa Walsh was a career criminal who'd fled Michigan to avoid prosecution. "The state attorney general is very interested in Miss Walsh's current activities," Henderson continued, "particularly her recent attempts to manipulate city contracts through proxy relationships." Proxy relationships? Using romantic relationships to influence business decisions. It's a form of fraud. I'd fed Henderson just enough information about Lisa's manipulation of Sarah and Jake to make him dig deeper. What he'd found was a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. Lisa Walsh was a professional grifter who specialized in destroying families and businesses for personal gain. When will they arrest her? They already have. This morning. She's being extradited to Michigan to face the original charges, plus new charges related to her activities here. I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Lisa had orchestrated the destruction of my marriage, but she'd forgotten that every chess player eventually meets a better player. What about Sarah and Jake? They were pawns, not players. The Attorney General isn't interested in prosecuting them unless they try to profit from their association with Miss Walsh. They won't. They're both too broken to profit from anything. Henderson nodded. I figured as much. This kind of manipulation leaves deep scars. I left Henderson's office feeling lighter than I had in months. Lisa Walsh would spend the next 5 to 10 years in prison, thinking about the man she'd underestimated. Sarah and Jake would spend the next 5 to 10 years rebuilding their lives from scratch, if they could manage it. And I would spend the next 5 to 10 years being exactly who I was meant to be. The villain they'd created, but also the hero of my own story. 6 months later, I ran into Emma at the grocery store. She was working as a cashier, wearing a name tag and a tired expression that made her look older than her 23 years. Hi, Dad. Emma. She scanned my items without making eye contact. How are you? Good. You? Getting by. Working 2 jobs, sharing an apartment with 3 roommates. Learning what the real world looks like. Learning builds character. So does forgiveness. I paid for my groceries and looked at my daughter for the first time in months. She'd lost weight, cut her hair, traded her designer clothes for thrift store basics. She looked like a different person. Emma, what did you learn from all this? She thought about it for a moment. That actions have consequences. That family should mean something. That some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. Good lessons. Dad, I really am sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I hurt you. Because I chose the wrong side. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or false emotion. All I saw was genuine regret and hard-earned wisdom. Sorry's a start, I said, but it's not enough. What would be enough? Time. Proof that you've actually changed. A demonstration that you understand why what you did was wrong. Emma nodded. How much time? As long as it takes. I walked out of the store, leaving my daughter to think about redemption and whether she wanted it badly enough to earn it. because that's the thing about being the villain in someone else's story. You get to decide who deserves a second chance and who doesn't. You get to set the terms for forgiveness. You get to choose when the story ends. And this story ends with me walking into the sunset, having learned that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to become the person your enemies think you are. They called me the villain. I wore the title better than they ever wore their masks.